Great. Well, yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me. It's cool to hear that you're such a diverse group spread out all over the place and with diverse interests across the spectrum of anthropology as well. So, I'm a cultural anthropologist or sociocultural anthropologist by training. And what I thought to talk about today is a bit about what I do now, but also since you all are students presumably interested in careers also and what one might do with a degree in anthropology, I thought I would tell you a little bit about the story of how I got here. So I work in design now, but my career was not designed at all. It's a series of fortunate accidents and lateral steps and following things that I love. I mean, I think anthropology has always sort of provided that for me. So so I'll jump right into it. I am a I said I'm a sociocultural anthropologist by training. I also think of myself as an anthropologist of architecture. There are not a lot of anthropologists working in architecture. Um, I currently work for a company called HGA. We're a nationwide firm based in Minneapolis. Pretty good size as architecture firms go. We've got about 1,000 employees across. I think there must be like 12 offices or so. So I sit in our Sacramento office. I live here because I went to graduate school at UC Davis near Sacramento and have come and gone for various reasons over the years. HGA is cool, in my opinion, and also I think this is the reason why they employ anthropologists, is because they are, I think, probably more invested in doing good research and driving innovation in architecture through research uh, into human behavior. So all architecture firms do some research into human behavior. All architecture research firms do research into materials and sustainability and new kinds of building technologies. But at HGA, I am part of what is called the Design Insight Group, or DIG for short, um, which is a team of interdisciplinary social scientists. Most of us, I think, have backgrounds uh, in design fields, environmental design fields specifically. Um, um, there are a lot of PhDs, a lot of master's degrees, so a lot of graduate degrees within our team. We're a team of 16 within this 1,000-person firm, and we work across all the market sectors. So that means healthcare, public architectures, corporate architecture. We serve um, arts, museums, performing arts, education, do a lot of higher education. So we work across all kinds of building types and types of clients. Um, on the right, you see there's a box that says our services include. On this side, I've sort of indicated the ones that are most relevant to me. So within the Design Insight Group, we're actually divided into three different teams. And we work with each other in different combinations, but organizationally, we're divided into three teams. So we have a team of lean process improvement experts who have backgrounds in industrial engineering and are probably more oriented towards the technical sides of design, certainly than I am. And actually, what I'm describing is a bit of a spectrum. Then we have a team of more sort of quantitative social scientists with backgrounds in interior design, architecture, design of cities, urban design and public spaces. Um, and they do sort of more behavioral research, quantitative social science type research. And then the third is the team that I belong to, which we call ourselves at the moment Innovation Anthropology, because we are a mix of people with backgrounds in design innovation and in anthropology. We're a team of four, and we're two of each. And that's just kind of a placeholder name for lack of imagination, I guess, lack of coming up with a better name than just describing literally what we do. But we try to use anthropological methods, ethnographic research methods, to really understand how people occupy space, what people want out of say, a university classroom or out of a hospital, what their experience is spending time there, whether they're a patient or they work there, whether you're a student or a professor, whether you're a government bureaucrat or somebody of the public coming to a governmental building. We try to understand from all these different perspectives how people move through space, and really in a vein that I think is really allied with anthropology, to understand these phenomena from their perspectives and really try and understand how they see things and experience things, and then take all of that insight and use it to drive innovation. I mean, we really think of ourselves as an engine of creativity too, and in an architecture firm, obviously, most of the people who I work with are pretty creative people, but to use sort of social science research and social science data as an engine of creativity, I actually think is fairly unique, and it's my favorite part of my job. So you will see that this presentation is cobbled together from slides of a bunch of other presentations, so they don't all necessarily match. This is a slide from presentations that I've been giving around, my team has been giving within our firm, as we build out our capacity and pursue different kinds of projects. And it speaks to sort of our, I guess, philosophical orientation. So, like I said, we're a mix of people with backgrounds in design innovation, of the kind of thinking that firms like IDEO do and have made really famous, of taking design thinking methodologies and use them to come up with new innovative ideas, sort of out of the box thinking. And then that's two of us have that background, and then the other two have backgrounds in anthropology. And in ethnographic research methods. And both of these have a commitment to making the world a better place through design too. And I think that's something that's certainly characteristic of our team. So we are interested in grounding the design of buildings, in particular in its social and cultural, historical and environmental context, so that a building really belongs to a place and all the complexity that comes with that. That's sort of the surroundings outside of the building. Inside of the building, we're interested in the social dynamics among organizations, communities, and spaces. So what it means to feel like you belong to a space or not, how power operates in space, how spaces, some buildings may be accessible and in certain ways and others are not to different groups of people. The third one, we believe very strongly that that people know best what kinds of space that they want to occupy or should occupy, and are themselves great bodies of creativity. And so we try to tap into that. And so we don't want to just design for people. We want to design with people and try and work hand in hand with users of buildings, our clients, different kinds of stakeholders, to help them imagine, not just imagine what how the space should look, but also learn new tools so that they can empower themselves to keep refining and changing and modifying the spaces where we work long after they work with us. And then the fourth one is to just come up with cool new ideas, which is really what all of this leads to. So these are some examples of questions that we have heard that have sort of defined or framed different kinds of projects that we've taken on, again, as social scientists working in the service of doing architecture. So I won't read these necessarily, but you can get a sense that they speak to different ideas about envisioning the future, how to go about sort of inclusive design processes, how to build spaces that foster collaboration and innovation within workplaces, how to design spaces so that they are oriented to the ways that healthcare or higher education or government buildings, how these are changing with new technologies, with new political currents, with how the economy changes. All of these things bear on our projects. And so again, as sort of holistic social scientists, we want to understand these dynamics really in their complexity. Okay, so I'll tell you how I got to this. And as I said, it was a somewhat winding path. So I studied anthropology as an undergraduate. I went to Colby College in Maine many years ago, and had never heard of anthropology until I got to college. Even after I got to college, I took some anthropology classes, but didn't have any particular idea that I wanted to major in anthropology. And then it came time to choose a major, and I went through the course catalog and I figured out which department had the coolest sounding classes, in my opinion, and that's how I ended up being an anthropology major, not with any real career orientation behind it. But I really fell in love with it through various experiences. Um, After I graduated, I took a few years before going to graduate school and worked in building trades. I had worked in landscape construction throughout high school, and liked working with my hands, and knew I probably wanted to go into some get a graduate degree, and wanted to take some time to spend time outside and before doing that. And in retrospect, this really built an interest that fueled my pursuit of anthropology later on. Um, I went to UC Davis. This is why I came to California 20 years ago, to start a PhD in anthropology at UC Davis, and intended to study um, indigenous people's relationships to landscapes. That's something I had studied as an undergraduate, had written a senior honors thesis about Native American claims to sacred sites on public lands in the United States. I should mention also that I grew up spending a lot of time in New Zealand. My dad lived in New Zealand when I was a teenager. Um, so I have a long-standing relationship there, and over time came to realize that it's a great asset to do ethnographic research in a place where you know people, where you know the history, where people can open doors for you. Um, so I ended up doing my doctoral work on indigenous Maori architecture in New Zealand. So some of you may know that the Maori people are sort of the largest indigenous group in New Zealand, and are relatively powerful compared to indigenous people throughout most of the rest of the world, for various historical reasons. And one of the consequences of that is that they have a very high profile in public culture, and a lot of sort of institutional support. So there's a lot of um, uh, what they call decolonizing or indigenizing higher education. One can get degrees in Maori sciences, or the integration of, say, Maori traditional knowledge with the science of ecology, for example. That also happens in architecture. I didn't necessarily know that. When I got there, I ended up working through a friend, opened some doors with some traditional wood carvers. And again, I landed there without any real intention to work with them academically. Um, but I liked making art, and thought they were fun people, and kind of just never left. And after a while, they handed me a chisel, and I got involved and started working with them. And so that experience um, led me to sort of looking into what other sort of applications are there of traditional Maori building knowledge in the 21st century, and that led to studying Maori architecture as a professional field, as a field that grants university degrees, and there are, corporate architecture firms that are practicing Maori architecture. And so it's a really interesting mix, to my mind, of sort of indigenous culture and all of the politics and history that comes with that, and then the sort of modern liberal nation state and its capitalist global economy, and how those things go together in some ways and don't in other ways, and are sites of real tension. So the story that I tell in my doctoral dissertation was about the design of some public space for the 2011 Rugby World Cup, which New Zealand hosted. New Zealand is crazy about rugby, and these games, like a soccer World Cup or like the Olympics, tend to be opportunities to showcase globally the sort of cultural distinction of the host country, and that often, and it's also an opportunity as a financial bonanza for tourism. So it becomes an opportunity to showcase and commodify the indigenous culture as something people from elsewhere in the world would want to come to New Zealand and see. So all of this was put on display, and architecture featured prominently in it. And so what I did was sort of trace the different kinds of dynamics and controversies and different actors, from architects to politicians to everyday folks to Maori tribal leaders, and just understand all of the different sort of perspectives and processes that went into making some of these spaces. So the premise is that buildings are not just solid objects, but are dynamic social technical processes, and that we should really understand uh, deeply the complexity of the social processes that go into buildings, far beyond what actually happens in a city planning office or in an architecture firm, but the ways that these plans encounter their publics and serve ideological functions that make people believe that they belong to a multicultural nation that values them or not, and provides economic opportunity or not. So I did this in various ways. These sort of slides speak to the different methods that I used to do this. So I interviewed a lot of architects, both Maori and not. There is a sort of a coherent history and canon of Maori architecture as a field. But as with many things, if you start probing and talking to people about what counts and what doesn't, and what's really exemplary of Maori architecture versus not, and what's modern versus traditional, and so on, you get to see there's a huge range of opinions about these things. And again, the diversity of opinion is really what was so interesting to me. Did a lot of archival research into architectural history in New Zealand, and how it is a site that sort of articulates the history of colonialism and the settler nation state. Participated in a lot of design charrettes, was a visiting fellow at the Auckland University of Technology in spatial design, where I got to spend a lot of time with college university architecture students, seeing how they think, especially through projects that were concerned with integrating Maori design practices and principles and forms into public architecture. Spent a lot of time walking around with a camera, looking at stuff. I think actually that's a probably underrepresented ethnographic method. It's really invaluable getting to know a space really intimately by just walking around and looking at stuff and seeing what you come across. It's one of the benefits. I do not have this luxury now that I work in the business world, but as an academic, when you have a lot of time and you're spending other people's money with research grants, you do have time to walk around and just see what you encounter, and it's really important to get to know the richness of a place. And of course, there was a tremendous amount of sort of Maori-looking things, even more than usual in the weeks and months leading up to the Rugby World Cup. And finally, I spent 10 years, as I said, apprenticing with these woodcarvers, coming and going, both between New Zealand and California, but also between Auckland, the big city, and the small town where I worked with these guys. And with them, they taught me how to hold a chisel, how to sharpen a chisel, how to carve their patterns and draw the traditional carving patterns. But also along the way, learned to speak the language, learned a number of their prayers and the sort of the songs that go along with carving, and came away with a real sense that that there's so much more to it than just the technical aspects that you do with your hands, but there's also a rich sort of philosophy behind it as well, or sort of orientation towards the world, a way of seeing the world, that's also encoded in carving. And in various ways, I carry that experience with me now, even though I'm not doing any work in New Zealand at the moment. This is a project we worked on. So we carved these sort of grand meeting houses for different local communities in the area. Published a chapter about that in a book about architecture in the Pacific, about how these wood carvers ran a government-funded welfare to work scheme that was basically the government subsidized them with funds to help them get get young men who would otherwise be smoking pot and playing video games on the couches at home in a fairly depressed rural economy um, to get their find a way, get a foot in the door of the local wage economy. So they would come to the carving shop and learn how to carve. And in learning how to carve, they'd learn what are called like the soft skills of of the wage labor economy, of reporting workplace accidents, showing up to work on time, being respectful. Some of it was actually very patronizing, not because the carvers were patronizing, but it was a patronizing system. And afterwards, they would go on to get fairly low paid jobs, honestly, in the kiwi fruit orchards and in the forestry blocks. So they had big pine plantations that they grow for export. But it was a way to get people into this economy that otherwise were not participating in it. And it was interesting and strange to me that Maori woodcarvers were enlisted to serve that purpose. Um, I have written most of a book, and in my spare time, mocked up the cover of what it will look like when I get around to finishing it. But I am quite busy working working for HGA at the moment, so I'm definitely not busy finishing this book. But we'll get back to it at some point. But it tells the story that I just told you. So all of this is now, or about 5 years ago, or maybe 6 years ago. Um, after I finished my doctoral dissertation, I actually worked in construction for a year, as you do with a PhD in anthropology, and then got a job at Haverford College as a visiting professor in anthropology, but also taught courses there in the environmental studies program, and also at Bryn Mawr College, which is the sister college of Haverford, has a program called the Growth and Structure of Cities program, which is a sort of pre-professional architecture and urban planning program with a sort of liberal arts focus. So it was actually a really fun environment for me to teach in and think through. So I taught classes on the anthropology of architecture, on indigenous peoples, on urban ecology, on I taught a class then afterwards at UC Davis briefly on ways of looking at landscapes and ways of sort of doing the social science of landscapes in the service of landscape architecture. And through these practices, this is all sort of part of this career trajectory that I'm describing, because along the way, I frankly got a little bored with lecturing and found myself at every opportunity turning my classroom into something like a design studio whenever possible. And these are with students who are anthropology majors or liberal arts majors of various kinds, don't necessarily have any training or experience in design or in art, or in architecture. And I just said, let's go for it. Let's read things and see what we can draw, and think through drawing and draw the things we're reading, and just play with making models, play with doing anthropology in ways beyond the written text, and ways beyond me lecturing and then students writing papers, and came to realize that that's really what I was passionate about, and that was sort of an important realization in moving towards actually working in the design industry. Another factor in this too was the pandemic. Also sort of upset the economy for everybody, and in an interesting way created a unique opportunity for me. I, after teaching at UC Davis 4 years ago, ended up, or maybe 3 years ago, ended up at Gensler in San Jose. Gensler is the largest design firm in the world. They're an architecture firm first and foremost, but also do a lot of brand design, experience design. Um, I started working there at an interesting moment. It was the beginning of 2022, which is when uh, in San Jose, in Silicon Valley, in the heart of the tech industry, all of these companies, like everyone else in the world, had sent their employees home during the pandemic and had shifted quite successfully to teams being able to work from home and keep things afloat. And then, for various reasons, they decided at the beginning of 2022 to start bringing people back into the office. And there are lots of reasons, lots of rationales for why you should do this. One of them being that people just think better together. There's more trust. There's more mentorship. There's more sense of belonging and reliance on one another. And these things can be really important to company culture. Um, there are also a lot of people who said, I'm never going back to that office. That office was not a nice place to work. My living room is a nice place to work. I can walk my dog. I can pick up my kids. I can take care of my garden. I can take care of myself. I have a better life. And it really made for this moment of real tension. At the same time, there was a very hot job market in the tech industry as well. And so we saw this phenomenon that was called in the press quiet quitting, where employees who didn't like uh, the sort of ramping work back up to pre-pandemic levels, if they didn't like what they were being pushed to do, there were jobs elsewhere that might give them a better recipe in terms of how much work is on their plate, and how much time they're expected to go into the office. Are they fully remote or hybrid? And there's a lot of power on the labor supply side of this relationship. And so a lot of corporate executives were really nervous about understanding, what do our employees want? How do people actually work? How do they create? How do they innovate? How do they socialize at work? How do people form friendships, mentorship, and so on? These are all concerns, sort of the traditional concerns of business anthropology. So they were design firms in architecture and interior design firms suddenly hiring anthropologists like me to make sense out of these things, to understand these sort of larger social dynamics that were driving the question of how many people are going to return to the office? What is the office for now if it's not the place where you come to work every day? Should there even be an office, and how much office do you need? And so obviously this is very complex uh, phenomena. Um, Along the way, met some friends at HGA where I now work. And um, through talking about my work, what I was doing at Gensler, and just sort of talking shop and comparing with them what they were up to, really came to realize that HGA has a very unique sort of intellectual culture and is really invested in doing a kind of academically driven social science research that was more true to my background and this kind of stuff that I was passionate about. Also, I thought this tech industry workplace anthropology was really interesting, but I also wanted to explore other building types besides corporate offices. So as of about 9 months ago, I landed at HGA, now working along some friends that I find to be very creative, smart, inspiring people in this team called Innovation Anthropology. So I'll quickly run through a few examples of projects that we work on. Like I said, we work across a broad range of sort of all the market sectors that our firm works in. So this is a corporate project that was concerned. This is pre-pandemic, so it's not concerned with the phenomena that I was just describing, but instead about how to create a employee experience that makes people want to come to work, happy at work, awake and engaged, and have friendships and have sort of intimate relationships with their coworkers that create a space for productivity, for creativity, for new ideas to emerge. And the premise of this project is that when people create the space for themselves, they'll feel like they belong to the space, and they will figure out how to co-create with us to design the kinds of space that best suits them. This is a healthcare project. This is a project I'm actually working on at the moment, so I blocked out the client's name. But it's a small regional healthcare provider in the Midwest for whom we're building a clinic at the moment, and they asked us to understand more broadly, how do people understand what it means to be healthy in the rural Midwest? Um, this is a phenomenon across the healthcare industry. People who, for whatever reason, both by their choice or by systemic problems of access, people who don't practice good preventative health are very expensive to healthcare systems because they put off going to see doctors and addressing problems and identifying problems early on, and then they end up in emergency rooms or in hospitals for more lengthy stays. These are expensive for the patients, they're expensive for insurance companies, they're expensive for the providers. And so they asked us to help them understand preventative health in this more sort of anthropological, holistic way, to understand ideologies about health and healthiness and people's anxieties about going to the doctor, and how they make decisions about when to seek healthcare. And so part of this informs the design of the clinic, and part of it also just informs their sort of strategic operations as a as a business or a nonprofit in this case. I didn't work on this project. My colleagues did, but we just recently published a report called "Boosting Equity in the Workplace" that's comprised of ideas about how to make workspaces more equitable across, the traditional markers of diversity, race, gender, class, sexuality, and so on. So it's a really cool project. I'm working on something similar at the moment. In fact, just yesterday was doing some research into best practices for the design of uh, um, wudu stations, which are wash stations for Muslim prayers in public spaces. And for Native American smudging spaces, where they burn sage or burn different kinds of plants materials for the cleansing of the smoke, which is really important in hospitals, but also in higher education. Corporate spaces are increasingly including these. So designing for these, there's the history, a lot of history of architecture is concerned with sort of designing for people in general, not marked by any particular identity. And there's sort of an old adage in the social sciences that when the identity of a subject isn't marked, you can just take for granted that there's sort of a middle class, white, straight male with some privilege. And so actually designing with different identities, different subject positions in mind is really important to making architecture more accessible to people, and is still, even in 2024, somewhat new in the architecture industry. And then this is my favorite project of all. This is in our public sector. We worked in designing a U.S. consulate recently. Overseas is in Kazakhstan. So I went to Kazakhstan in November. The staff in U.S. consulates around the world are the minority are American diplomats who go and work there, and the majority, and the Americans are there on a short, usually 3-year cycle. The majority of the staff are local employees, and so we were charged with understanding, how do Kazakh people like to work in the workplace? What do they eat? How do they gather? How do they sit? How is it different than how we design corporate office spaces in the United States? And so that involved working with those employees, as well as visiting museums, talking to artists, talking to anthropologists, talking to architecture historians. The image on the top is a yurt. It's a traditional sort of round tent-like structure from when Kazakh people were nomads up until about 300 years ago. And that form gets replayed in contemporary architectures a lot in Kazakhstan as sort of a sign of their own cultural identity. So that we were tasked with figuring out how to integrate some of these cultural practices and forms of material culture into the architecture. And so this is sort of a montage of just photos that I took around. They eat a lot of horses in Kazakhstan. Yeah, and that's it. So that was a lot of fast talking, but I wanted to get through it somewhat quickly so we have time to discuss. So I'll stop sharing.
So yes, I think that first of all, I think the presentation was very interesting, like because I really learned a lot. And what I put in the chat was it really made me think about those live work play areas as they're called, where they have housing and restaurants, and even I'm seeing now they're having like medical clinics all in like a walking distance of each other. So I'm saying that's probably why, people were thinking about this, anthropologists in the field were thinking about this, because there was a huge need for it. It's just a lot of people want to be in places like that now.
For
um
sure, and our firm and others are actually investing more and more into like mixed use urbanism for that reason, both for environmental reasons around transportation, but also urban quality of life of putting residential spaces, commercial spaces, workspaces all near each other, because that's how people want to be, and it's not necessarily for various reasons how our cities are designed. So that's a very insightful comment.
yes, and then what stood out to me in your presentation was how you're also looking at it from a cultural perspective, like in your last few slides where you took into account like what people need culturally. Because also, like for example, when I was on the ASU campus, I did see the Widow stations, and what it was, I think it was in the library. So it's like the fact that now places are including that. So now people don't have to use like a restroom or actually like a closet or something. They actually have a design space to help make places more inclusive.
For sure. And those spaces have interesting histories as well. I mean, it's again, I think what's useful as an anthropologist and are useful for to have training as an anthropologist and doing this kind of work is not just in discovering what people want. I mean, anthropology is very well suited to listening to people, um, but also being able to situate those things in the larger context. I mean, foot wash stations for Muslim prayers in public institutions is a politically controversial project in the United States, and it depends on where you are, how controversial it is. And so you have to do this kind of work. You also have to be aware of these larger sort of political um, and social dynamics that anthropologists are also concerned with.
Yes. So if anybody else has any questions, you can either type them in or unmute, whichever one you feel most comfortable with. Anybody else has a question? I think somebody's typing right now. But other than that, I really enjoyed the presentation. I think it was very well put together because Angela is the one who brought design anthropology to our attention because none of us really knew about it before like this semester. And we're seeing different because we had people coming that were more into tech. And then now you're actually into like architecture. That's also, I didn't know that was also, but it makes sense the way you explained it. I can see definitely like how anthropology applies.
Yeah, could I ask you about that? Like how I
Yeah.
noticed when you showed like the sort of schedule of speakers and events. Um, why are you so interested in design anthropology? I'm just
Angela
curious.
pointed it out. I think it's more Angela's, but also I'm interested now too because I really had no idea. But it's just something to
Um,
help people, what you say, Angela?
no, 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 you can go.
Oh yeah, I was just saying like we just are always looking for ways to see kind of like I always think of it as anthropology is everywhere. So we're always trying to show people like it's not just about archaeology or medicine or like prehistoric things. It's things that are still very relevant today and are helping people advance further. So that's what a lot of our events are trying to show people.
Yeah, I like to say that like if people ask what does anthropology do? I mean, because as I'm sure you guys know, there's like very entrenched stereotypes about anthropology of being concerned with um, ancient peoples or some ideas are actually really problematic and it's sort of racist in their logics. Or anthropologists study dinosaurs or things like that. So when you have to sort of explain these things, I always say everything that exists is of interest to anthropologists, because everything that exists by definition exists from human perspectives. There's nothing outside of our own perception that could exist. So and what we do is study how people see the world. So it's the worlds that people see that we're also interested in.
Yeah, I definitely understand that because anytime I'm outside of like I'm anthropology setting, I'm still analyzing everything because it just kind of really helps shape my mindset to always think as an anthropologist because I'm always analyzing, always thinking about somebody else's perspective. How could something be different? Just always, I'm constantly thinking like that.
Yeah. What do you guys, I know some of you are sort of upper class people or probably going to graduate and look for jobs. Do you think do you have a sense of how studying anthropology helps you in that respect? Or is
Yes, it
that
helped
like
me
an
a lot.
intimidating question?
No, I mean it really helped me because I started off with a biological anthropology focus, but I felt like it wasn't really as relevant as I would like my career to be. So I switched to medical, and with medical anthropology, I'm looking at somebody's their past. I'm looking at what's going on in their life currently. Any have they had trauma? Do they have a lot of stress? Are they working several jobs and that's why they're sick and in the hospital? I think of stuff like that because I recently spoke to high school students and that never heard of anthropology, and I'm telling them things like this because it's just I'm trying. I don't want to ramble too much, but I just really helps me always consider the perspective of another person. But Francis had Francis has okay, Francis.
Hi. Yeah, I am currently in a class. It's around Islam and modern day. And when I first heard of anthropology, yeah, I did think of archaeologists, like going to Egypt and studying tombs and stuff like that. But it's a bigger aspect, like ranging from the differences between culture and religion. And it's so interesting. Like I am absolutely in love with this class. And I took another class that actually talked about architecture as well, depending on where people live within the world and their climate. So like you're gonna need a house that's built for warmer climates that's cooler, kind of like homes that are made out of clay, mud. It creates a cooler environment if you don't have central AC. And if you're towards more of the equator, it's going to be hotter. So it makes more sense instead of having like um a concrete, let's say, home. It'll be hotter because it'll collect all that heat from the sun. And I just thought that that was very interesting, that architecture, religion, culture, all that is also anthropology. And that's why I've been actually joined this group to learn more about anthropology. So it's been interesting.
That's great. I mean, I actually feel very strongly about that. I mean, this sort of a conceptual premise of my doctoral research was that in a way architects are also anthropologists in a different form, or are doing anthropologists in their way. Like they're anthropologists of buildings. I mean, so they're not literally trained in anthropology. They don't necessarily have the sort of background in anthropological theory, but architects for forever have had an interest in human behavior and how that there's a great architect put it this way. It was something like architecture is like habits turned to stone, and so buildings are just uh, material objectifications of how we live with one another, and then they end up acting back on us, and so our bodies are in a way fleshy enactments of the buildings and the built environments that we live in and move through all the time. There's this constant feedback loop, and I always feel that's really interesting, like looking to other fields of expertise that have to have their own perspectives of what it means to be a human. And that's also a really rich territory for anthropology. So um,
Amy, I think raised first, or either whoever wants to go first, Amy or Jonathan.
Oh, thanks. So I wanted to circle back to the discussion you had about corporate spaces. Something I was kind of interested in is one of the things I'm really interested in is how anthropology and technology are going to have an interactions and interplay with each other. But one of the things I'm really curious about is like the way that office space affects the way people interact with each other. Because I know with Microsoft, the Microsoft corporate campus, they have individual offices, and it can make it so that you have that privacy if you need it, versus spaces like with Meta where they have the large open spaces or other, and then talking about the kind of design that you're talking about where the created spaces. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the difference between, you know, those different spaces and how they can interact and impact the way that people interact with each other in a corporate setting?
Sure. Yeah, I should say, I mean, this is such an interesting moment for this question because it's changing so quickly. I mean, we are living in the real-time experiment with how to do this. And these questions of, you know, the design of physical spaces are also inseparable from the design of communication technology, because that, you know, one of the reasons people need to be together in an office is because Zoom meetings don't do enough to really capture the dynamism of how people naturally interact with one another. So, I mean, what I have seen is, I guess most recently is really leaning towards a diversity of workspaces, because you don't necessarily know, um, uh, there's not a sort of one size fits all way of working that's going to serve everybody in your organization, regardless of scale. So a lot of companies want to have open plan workspaces that foster collaboration. It's also cheaper. It also creates you need quite a lot less square footage to have an open plan space than to give everybody their own enclosed office. It has different dynamics of access, but it can be hard to concentrate in those spaces. So it's not just a binary between enclosed offices and open plan workspaces, but there's also like phone rooms, meeting rooms of different sizes where you can duck in to have meetings remotely, or in person with groups of different sizes. And then the other new thing I think is firms are drawing, or the organizations within architecture firms that design corporate workplaces are now building these sort of synergies with the organizations that work in the hospitality industries and design hotels. And so they're importing design ideas from hotel lobbies into corporate office spaces because they're more relaxing spaces to come together. And the underlying notion being, if I need to sit down and focus at a computer for 6 hours, I'm not going to spend time commuting to go to the office and work in a loud environment where people are going to come tap me on the shoulder. So the office doesn't really serve, for a lot of companies are deliberately deciding, office doesn't serve that purpose anymore. And for people who have young kids at home, or or whatever, live in a cramped apartment and don't have a space for a desk, there can be space to focus in the workplace for them. But the default assumption is not that people are going to come to the office to focus, or come to the office frequently even. So a lot of companies are just deciding one day a week. And so with that in mind, it creates, this is a long answer, but it creates this other downstream decision. If people are only going to come in one day a week, and the purpose is that they're going to come in is not to focus, but to interact with one another, then you need a policy or a behavioral mechanism in place to make sure that everybody's in the office on the same day. Otherwise, it's no point coming in. And so these spatial design problems are always social problems as well, and systems problem, design of workplace systems, not just spaces.
Thank
And
you
then,
for your answer.
Sure.
we have Jonathan and then Angela.
Hi. I really liked some of the stuff you touched on, especially things with like working with the Maori and some of the different like intercultural perspectives that were kind of being taken into consideration with like architecture and things like that. My question kind of relates to I'm doing some independent research on the side with a co-ed from another university on using like new visualization methods for preserving like non-monumental level heritage of like especially minority cultures in like Western countries, predominantly the US. So I was just kind of wondering, like what your experience when you were working with like the Maui woodcutters and just other experience you have with like cultural considerations for architecture, kind of just like if you feel that at least in the cultural, I'm sorry, at least at the corporate level, that these types of cultural traditions are being taken into account more, or if you feel like there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, if you have an opinion on that.
Yeah, so I'll speak to the last question first. It depends on where you are. So, like I said, in New Zealand, taking into account Maori relationships to space and land and history and material culture, including archaeological artifacts, um, is really important. I mean, it's politically important. Maori are politically powerful in this respect. This is all encoded in the law and protected that way, which doesn't mean to say there isn't, the legacy of colonialism and racism in New Zealand. There certainly is. So architecture firms and across the built environment, infrastructure builders in particular, really have to pay attention to these things, much like they do in the U.S. probably, and to a different degree. The firm that I work for now at HGA, we have um, worked with Native Americans as clients. Not since I have not worked on any of these projects in the 9 months that I've been with HGA. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I could comment on that specifically, except to say that I think it's um, we're what I like about HGA, the reason I work for HGA is I think it's a sophisticated about these things and really respectful. And part of putting research forward as a point of distinction in the marketplace as part of our brand means also doing research with care and with care for the people that we work with. And we invest a lot in designing for equity and designing in ways that enshrine cultural landscapes. For example, I just saw a presentation. Our firm just designed a memorial at Monticello at Thomas Jefferson's plantation, on a memorial to the unmarked graves of I think 100 or so slaves, and the question of how do you tell their story and how do you make sure that story is present as part of the history of that place. So, but you asked
Yeah.
a question about technology. I'm not sure. Maybe I could guess, but about how to like visualize these things and.
Oh well, I'm not really sure. It was at least the research I'm doing is more geared towards things like photogrammetry and lidar. I'm not really sure you got experience with that, so I kind of just more geared towards your interactions with like just different considerations for maintaining cultural architecture and things like that in general. But
I
I
mean,
think you
I would
answered it
say,
pretty well.
yeah, my interest in architecture is really pervaded by this larger uh, philosophy from anthropology, which is that and this is putting it really simply, but like people don't mean what we like what people think about landscapes or the way that they're attached to the landscapes or to buildings. What we hear when they describe that isn't necessarily what they mean. And anthropology teaches you to chase after that little difference, that thing that exceeds what's possible for us to understand. And I think that's really true. When you work with indigenous people, you really see that with
Mm.
landscapes. The idea that the landscape itself is a living ancestor, that a mountain is a person, is a sort of modern Western ontology or worldview. That's impossible. I mean, that's a metaphor. But in the Maori world, it's not a metaphor. It's quite literal. And
Mm.
so, how do you deal with digging a hole and pulling out artifacts? I mean, it has just this really rich connotations to it that I think as I'm sure archaeology is very well informed by cultural anthropology for these reasons of
Mm.
understanding that the contemporary context. The past might be buried, but it's not in the past. The past is very much in the present. So,
Right. Thank you.
sure. Thank you.
And then Angela had a question.
Hello. So, I reached out to you because we wanted to explore like different types of subfields in anthropology. So like while I was listening to a podcast about anthropology, there was one podcast about design anthropology. That's when I first knew about it and I tried to learn more about it. So in the process, I got to find you on LinkedIn and reach out to you. But yeah, we didn't know more like about this field at first. You know, we definitely didn't know that we could still practice like research while still in working in these like firms. So yes, that's definitely eye-opening. My main question would be like during while you're doing ethnography, like what are the main questions that you ask users about their experience?
Yeah, what a good question. Let me say, I just put in the chat a link to an organization that you may all want to know about called EPIC, which stands for Ethnographic Praxis and Industry, I think. Ethnographic Practice and Industry Conference is the acronym. It's design anthropologists, mostly from the tech industry and sort of product design spaces, are very prominent there. I have not been yet, but intend to inject some architecture into that organization at some point. But it's the place to go to see how anthropology is applied to different kinds of design fields, and it's really smart, interesting people. Um, what do I ask? You know, the best piece of advice that I got when I moved out of academia into the corporate world was, at first I thought there must be this way, you know, the way that design anthropology sometimes is framed as like interesting methods, research methods for getting at what makes people really tick. I think that's how the corporate world often sees anthropology, as like, you know, now we can really get at what people are all about, you know. And I thought, okay, well, what is that? How do I, like, I don't have a training in that. My background is very academic. My background's in like indigenous landscapes. It doesn't help me design office spaces. So I thought, I just got to find out like who can tell me this, who can tell me what are the right questions to ask. And then somebody said to me, um, you know, everything that we do is just figuring things out, and figuring out how to figure it out is part of figuring it out. And so there's no recipe. Every project is different. I believe very strongly in like um, really framing up a question that you're going to pursue, even at the risk that it might be the wrong question. Being very specific and concrete and narrow about it, because it just leads you into a kind of concreteness as a way of like um, asking really high level questions broadly that is very conducive to people giving you like canned answers, just reiterating cliches. I mean, that's part of our cultural, you know, we're immersed in our own oral tradition, our own conventional ways of talking about our lives through pop culture and whatever. And so it takes a lot of time of talking to people to cut through those cliches and get them to start really thinking critically about how they think about themselves, how they think about their own lives, the stories they tell about their own lives. And so if you can really ask them about specific things that they don't already, you know, if you ask somebody, how do you like, I had just had this experience last week, like how is it when you go to a doctor's appointment, to a clinic, um, their response is, yeah, it's fine. Oh, how is it parking? Yeah, it's good. How's the registration? Yeah, it's okay. You know what I mean? And so like those are just kind of dead ends, asking questions that way. So you really want to have a clear sense of what you're really trying to understand in mind and pursue that, and that'll lead on to all kinds of other things that you didn't anticipate. So all the answers to questions you didn't ask.
Thank you for the advice. So lastly, is there any like overall advice you would want to give if there are students that are wanting to go into like the business field or like the design field?
Yeah, I would say if you want to go into design, you should, if you want to go into design, you should get some training in design and not just in anthropology. So because there are a lot of design sort of graduate programs that that are interested in anthropology, and so you don't have, like, if you want to continue to do anthropology, you don't necessarily have to continue to study anthropology. You can also get at it through other ways. But also, you know, if you want to continue to study anthropology, getting a degree in like applied anthropology with um, uh, that intentionally pursues design as something you want to study and want to go into, those are also really viable. I mean, anthropology is valuable right now in the business world and in the design world. Whether or not you can get there with just a bachelor's degree, I'm not sure. It depends. I guess it depends on what kind of experience you have under your belt. But there's like a weird. I still find it a little weird, the kind of cachet that's attached to anthropology. People appreciate it in a way that seems to be growing. I guess because of this mystique of like, we're going to tell you what people are really all about now. So so you should leverage that whether or not you believe in it, as I have.
Yes, so if there are any other questions, I just want to thank you again, Dr. Culbertson, for coming to talk to us. This was very interesting. I would say this is one of our best events so far this semester, because I really, really did learn a lot and I really enjoyed it. So if there isn't anything else anybody has to ask, we're gonna end the meeting here. We would love to have you back for another, because this was really interesting. I'm sure there's more you could say regarding it, and I just want to thank everybody for joining.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Angela has my email address, so feel free to get in touch if you'd like.
Yes,
Otherwise,
thank you so
thanks again.
much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.